Hello, everybody out there in comic book land. My name is George Serrano, aka The Don, and if you're here, you can only be here for one reason. That's a brand new episode of Major Discourse, where we talk to the latest and greatest in the comic book medium and see what makes them tick. As always, I am never alone. If you can please introduce yourself.
Everybody, I'm the fantastic Frank Jerome, and today I have a void that I hope to fill with conversation.
Bro, we are in rarefied air today. I'm super stoked for our conversation here today, because we got someone super special here with us, the giver of the grave goods, filling the void of our hearts, the Iron Horse Employee of the Month, the Goodwill Ambassador of Atlan, and Bob Reynolds' best bud from the bottom of the hill to the top of the must-read list, the Wizard fan, Prism, and Eisner Award winning Paul Jenkins. Paul, how the heck are you?
Well, I'm doing great, and I got to say that might be one of my favorite introductions I've ever heard because you went into the deep cuts back there. You're talking about my band originally. You're talking about where I used to work as a waiter. So that's fantastic. We're already off to a good start. Thank you.
Well, it's because I feel like I know you, Paul, through some of your work here that we've read, we've covered. You've always been such a transparent, creative, and just like upfront. And I know you've probably heard this a bunch, but I was in tears dealing with your recent Sentry run, your return back
Yeah.
to form, especially with the Watchdog stuff. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, I read that. I can't get any sadder. And then I read your Substack, where you are
Uh,
also extremely transparent and extremely
yeah.
vulnerable there. And just a little bit of a story of my own. My biggest journey into sort of looking at comics analytically started after I lost my father.
Mm.
And my father had went through a period of time where he just wasn't well, and then lost brain function. So push comes to shove, I'm the only person next of kin at the hospital, and I get to talk to by the doctor, who says there's basically no brain function, but we can't do anything without permission. You basically have to, as you put it in the story, ring the bell, you
Mm.
know? And ultimately, I'm not judge, jury, or executioner in that situation, but the weight, right? The weight of walking away from somebody you care about tremendously, who's been so integral in so many different parts of your life. Reading that story just reminds me, in a world where I blame it on capitalism, in a world where we're being split apart into so many different sections and often feel isolated. Things that the character of the Void kind of represent, that depression, that isolation. You read something like that and you feel less alone. Did you always wear your heart on your sleeve when it came to writing in general, or was it something that just kind of came naturally as you continue to write? Because I would imagine in the beginning, well, you have a very different story starting on Hellblazer, but most people are trying to pitch what they think others want as opposed to the story that they would want to write. Have you found yourself in that bit of a crossroads at all? What would you say your journey was in regards to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the challenge that you have as a creative person probably becomes one of how honest do I want to be? You know, if you're a writer, you're telling the world that you understand these ideas. So if you write about someone breaking up with you, you're like, yeah, I've been through that, or I've certainly been close to it, right? So I
Yeah.
think that we, as writers, we are always kind of duty bound to explain the things that we see in the world. And I wasn't necessarily a person that grew up with television. We didn't have one. And so probably it was only about 5 years ago that I started talking about overtly about the way that I was raised. Up until
Okay.
that point, I had written about it plenty of times, but I just hadn't kind of told everybody in the world, hey, listen, this is actually a part of my life. Let me show you what I do. If anyone has the opportunity to see the back of the current Hellblazer omnibus, where they just reprinted all of my stuff,
Yes. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
learn that every single issue of Hellblazer that I wrote had a story behind it. These are all real people. They were real experiences. Some of them are hilarious, some of them are sad. But ultimately, what I learned a long time ago was that I wasn't really going to be a television watcher. I wasn't going to read a lot of comics. I wasn't going to, you know, I like film. Um, but I wasn't going to pull from those things. I was going to pull from leading a very interesting life. and I have led one that I think is pretty crazy. Now,
Yeah.
there's an ancient Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times." So maybe it's not all been positive, but you're referring specifically, for example, to the last Sentry series, and I think we're probably past the kind of spoiler alert moment. So,
Fair.
spoiler alerts to anyone that doesn't want to know. The story was about grief. And what I learned a while ago about Sentry, but I kind of knew it when I created the character, was that it was really going to be a story about the mental health challenges that we all face, right? If you look, I mean, I invite anybody to do this. Either we personally deal with a mental health challenge. Well, let me tell you one of the challenges we all deal with. It's a very fractured world. You just mentioned this, George. We're living in a time that's very difficult. You've got a lot of people who are identifying with like a clan or an idea. There's a lot of like tribalism right now, which is fed by politicians who need that kind of work. So people are being moved around. People are learning how to dislike each other, how to hate each other. That's just counterproductive in the universe. And also, I think every family can say, well, look, my grandmother died of Alzheimer's. Mine did have dementia, right? Um, you know, your father did. And so we all deal with challenges of mental health. And so the Sentry represents that kind of story. In the recent one, yeah, I had been through it with my cat recently, but I'd been through things with other animals, and specifically one that I don't think I ever got over, that I lost. And so when the book came out, I knew that we had four issues, but I knew that what we were going to do. And I had said to anyone I said, this is going to make you cry, this book. It will make you cry. And of course, what's going to make you cry? I mean, it may not even be that we read about like a family member, but I think if you think about losing a pet, it
Yeah.
always really hurts. And we all go through it, right? We all go through it. That's a mental health challenge because you have to go and lose someone, especially dogs, right? Because dogs are just so loyal and love you, and you're their world. And so at one point, you you have to say goodbye to them and let them go, right? And so it's
Yeah.
just really hard. And when I wrote issue three, I will be honest, the scenes in which he has to take his dog in, it actually happened to me. Saying goodbye to my cat, they left me alone in a room and they said, ring the bell when you're ready. And then I got to sit with her and talk to her a little bit. And, she's a cat. She doesn't understand English, but, she was purring just before they
Yeah.
came in, right? So she was on her way out. She had closed down. But when I held her and talked to her, she was purring. So it was like this goodbye. And then they put the substance in her and she's gone, right?
Hmm.
And so I think I've done that with my work always. I think I've always been able to write about the things that I experience. And if I'm writing about a serial killer, just so that we're clear, I'm not a serial killer, right?
Good to know.
But I
You
can
write
look,
that down. Not
right,
a
write that
serial
down, yeah.
killer.
But I can look at the effect of murder on a family, for example, and see the pain that they go through and see the difficulty and see the evil. And as long as I can halfway describe that, then I'm doing okay. And that's a very long-winded answer, but it just kind of says like, look, write the things that you understand. Don't write the things that you read in a different comic book. And I think at times this industry in comics has been like that. I mean, plenty of people that sort of refer to something. There's some crossover event that takes like 19 issues to understand, and it crosses over with four other books, and you have to know the history of the character. To me, that's very poor for the industry. But I think we need to start getting back to core stories that I love writing them. So maybe I'm just an advocate for it for that reason.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And you were even with Sentry coming back to that for a hat trick, I bet there, especially when time goes on, people have their own expectations of where that should go. But ultimately, they didn't even know what Sentry should be because he wasn't a thing. So, but Pat, after a while, you almost lose a little bit of that ownership to the fan base that feels
Yeah.
like it's someone that belongs to them. And, in the next one, he should fight. And so you fast forward and, little kind of silly golden age feats like the power of a million exploding suns gets taken as gospel.
That's
And
right.
you have forums of like, well, technically if it's 18 megatons of power, so if he fought against Superman, and what do you say to the discussion kind of get devolving into power scaling as opposed to what you were originally trying to achieve with a story like that?
Yeah, I just actually had this experience this morning, where someone sent me a link and they said, "Hey, look, uh, Paul Jenkins once said that Sentry could easily defeat Molecule Man, but we know this, but here's the numbers and here's the stuff, and a million exploding suns." To which my response would be, okay, I didn't say which suns they were, right? What if they were all brown dwarfs? That's not really that powerful. But what if they were all the biggest million biggest stars in the universe? That would be a
Yeah,
lot of power, right?
right.
Um, there's sort of pointless in some ways, and I
Yeah,
found to my horror that someone had asked me about Molecule Man, and I'd said, "Oh, I always wrote him as the power of a god," which they took to mean, um, you know, that he's more powerful. And the next thing you know, Paul Jenkins puts the official stamp on the power of Sentry, which proves that Sentry can beat Hulk. And I'm like, no, please, I never write about it. And so
right.
one thing I'll definitely say, I've said this in a couple of interviews, that when I worked on Thunderbolts and I got to interact with the executive producers and with Jake Schreier, the director, and I said, look, one of the first things I said was, Jake, um, it's not about how powerful he is, it's about how vulnerable he is. And Jake just ran with that. He got it immediately and went, "You're right. It's not about a million exploding suns. It's about carrying the weight of a million exploding suns," which is the first line of the news series.
Yeah. And it's proof positive that those are the sentiments that people that are long lasting that people leave with, because I think that to all of the creation of that film's credit, that's what people left with was Bob's story. There was a lot of MCU stuff that had to be tied up. There was a lot of character stuff that had to be moved along, but ultimately it's the very human story of Bob, the very human story of that depression. Similar, like watching your friends pull you from the literal void was so evocative of, I think,
Yeah,
multiple people's experience. And you don't know what it's like to wake up in a lab with adamantium, grafted to you sometimes, or have the voice where you can shatter whole planets. But I think everyone's been in that position
yep,
where, that spiral. Watching even in the sequel series, watching Bob sort of spiral and almost give into the void. There is no more me left. It's only this dark figure.
yeah,
A lot of the Marvel characters, when you think of like Captain America, Spider-Man, are paragons of virtue. They're almost stainless, and that's why they endure. But then you also need characters that humans can look at, because humans are flawed and we're fallible. And so to see even the greatest, the people who can commit the feats of great strength, speed, stuff like that, for them to still deal with that battle internally, just increases the relatability factor. But I laughed at myself because at one point it seems like he's talking to an AI therapist, like he's talking to ChatGPT about like, "Hey,
yeah,
I am depressed. How do you feel?" Well,
yeah.
and did that ring true? Was I supposed to connect those dots there?
Yeah, somewhat. The big thing, the voice that speaks to him throughout the
Mhm.
story. Um, I have always written that in second person, which is very unusual, right? Like, you think this, you think that, because I felt that that voice for the things that were being described around it became his Jiminy Cricket, the little conscience that sat on his shoulder.
Yeah,
So when it says, your name is Bob Reynolds, you carry the weight of a million exploding suns, or whatever it is that we say, it's as if someone's telling him that. It's his heart that's telling him that. It's his soul that's telling him that. In other words, it's his conscience that's telling him that. And it might be the void at times, and it might be certainly there's a different interaction with Clock, his like AI,
yeah.
where Clock gives him information and tells him what's happening and how long there is till the next problem and all that kind of stuff. So he's fighting a lot of different outside influences, and his quest is to work out what kind of human he is.
Yeah. I just find in a world now we're quicker to turn to those sort of automated processes instead of talking to humans, because how the stigma that sometimes comes with mental health. So seeing him go to therapy mode with his that's not something he was going to sit down with Reed and do, because who knows if Reed's going to get him 100%.
Yeah,
But
right.
to see him kind of go through his clock through it, it was like I've seen that. I've seen how
Yeah.
that can kind of devolve.
And he does say to himself, he wonders, is it possible to lie to yourself? You know, because
Yeah,
what he's actually doing is he's lying to the void. He's saying, okay, I'm going to let you go. You go and kill a bunch of horrible, bad people. If you do it that way, you can have whatever time, you can have the time of your life, right?
yeah,
You take out people, you destroy Kingpin, you destroy, because by doing so in the story, he basically gets 30,000 people out of work. A bunch of people die on an island. The Void does all of it,
Hmm.
but that's the karmic bank that allows him to be the Sentry. And just so that we're clear, that's going to be my future with the character once we hopefully get him up and running regularly.
Awesome.
The idea that he can now finally use his powers without wondering whether the void, because he's worked out a loophole, and it's
Mm.
morally ambiguous. In fact, it's probably morally questionable,
Yeah, 100%.
but it's a good one, right? It's one that allows me, because I think the thing I found after coming back to the character with a 15-year gap, what I thought was not helpful was writing about how powerful he was and stuff that he did, and he was crazy, so therefore let's kill him, which is
Yeah,
very frustrating because so many people who struggle with mental health have really found a love for Bob because of the Thunderbolts and because of how it means what it means to them. And so that's the opposite of how we should write him. Don't write him as an evil guy just because he's crazy. Don't write that he has to be disposed of. Because I've
right,
got a lot of people that have written to me and said how disappointed they are that was allowed to happen because they struggle with their mental health, and basically the message they're getting is they're not worth it,
right. Or that it could be cured, right? Like we could
or they
just
can
get
be
rid of the
cured.
voids of our lives and that bad part of you is gone forever when the true path is understanding and kind of accepting the good parts with the bad, regardless if those good parts were parts you created or how society kind of formed you. So
Yeah,
like yeah, seeing
sorry.
that stuff to me is just way more interesting than again punching someone into the sun or
Right.
whatever. But to speak to all of that, what do you think it is about? Because I've heard you speak in interviews prior about the relationship Bob has to Hulk. What is it about that relationship that you dig? Because you keep kind of revisiting that relationship. We've even seen it in World War Hulk. Like he was one of the people that was able to kind of
Yeah.
get to Bruce in various different ways. But yeah, what is it to you as somebody who created this character? His relationship with the Hulk, Bruce Banner.
There are a couple of reasons why I love that relationship. One is that when I did the original Sentry Hulk crossover story, all the way back in 2000, 2001, I had been very friendly with Bill Sienkiewicz, who did Big
Oh.
Numbers, and I was the editor.
Right,
So
right,
far
yeah.
more at Big Numbers, I knew Bill. Bill had had a really hard time trying to put himself together through that. But he had a couple of personal issues to deal with, and he had eventually kind of said, "Look, I can do issue 3, but I can't continue with the project." So he was very disappointed about that. And then, the project fell to pieces, and the fourth issue got destroyed, and so on. So Bill hadn't worked in sequential narrative for a while, and I called him up and I said, "Mate, how would it feel to come back to doing a book? Would you do one with me about the Sentry and the Hulk?" And he said, "Tell you what, I'm somewhat. I really want to do it, but would you be okay with doing 2 panel pages?" And I said, "Absolutely, man, totally cool." And it gave me a creative challenge that I loved,
Yeah.
and and it reads really well. And most people don't realize that pretty much every page is a 2 panel page, which I think is really interesting. And so I had immediately realized, oh wow, we wrote something that actually has power. Look, the Hulk never gets a break, right? If you just take the original classic Hulk, he's angry. We understand that this is fuel from his childhood. He's struggling with mental health issues, obviously.
Hmm.
And I thought, what a great little line, what a great idea that the reason that no one knew that his skin hurt, and that's what made him so angry, was because no one had ever asked him.
Fair.
No
Fair.
one
Yeah.
had no one had given him the time, and here came the Golden Guardian of Good, and every time the Hulk was near the Sentry, his skin didn't hurt anymore, and so he was super loyal. And I wrote him as a child, a child with special needs actually,
Yeah.
and he just loves the Sentry. He feels good with the Sentry. He loves the dog. And after I'd written it a couple of times, I realized, oh my God, this relationship is like my favorite thing to write. It's so cool that like the Hulk just gives to him. The Hulk is
Yeah.
totally loyal to him, and it's so worthwhile. Every time I write those 2 characters, I'm like, that was a really good scene. And actually, if you look at the last series, there is a scene that really is my favorite, where he goes and he sits with a Hulk over a fire,
Hmm.
and they're out in the wilderness, and they've been talking about all the problems and stuff. And the Hulk thinks he can play fetch with the dog, but he realizes, oh, the dog's not well, and so he asks, in his little childlike manner, he kind of asks, is the dog? unhappy? No. Is it sick? Yeah. Was it going to die? And Sentry says, yeah. And the Hulk's like, oh, right, this is goodbye. Like he takes it all.
Yeah.
And then at the very end, he puts his arm around Sentry. And to me, I know writing that page and certainly rereading it, even that one brings tears to my eyes because I just think the honesty of children is always right there, isn't it?
Yeah, I even liked, the other side of that coin where he's kind of giving Sentry attitude, and Sentry's like, "Hey, God, I thought we were best friends." He goes, "Yeah, we're friends, but I can't, I got a poker face. I can't, like I can't. Like, what do you want me to do here in this situation?" But Hulk also feels like an incredibly challenging character in some ways, especially when you talk about trying to depict him in short form like film and stuff, because you're ultimately fans are there for the Hulk, but Bruce isn't.
Yeah,
Bruce doesn't want the Hulk to come out.
yeah.
And so you're almost at odds there. Did you find that at all challenging when tackling a character like the Hulk?
Well, obviously I had a stint on the Hulk. I wrote Hulk for a year and a half or so, and so the first thing that happened when I came to do it, I looked at what they had been doing and said, I don't get it. There's one scene that they had done where the Hulk drives himself through um, a plane and 187 people are killed on a plane. And I'm like, that makes him a mass murderer, and there's no coming back from that. You don't
Yeah.
get to say, hey, listen, I'm sorry. So I thought that
Right.
was a pretty incorrect approach to the Hulk. Right? I didn't think that was a great idea. And what I did initially was just what is the Hulk? What's the one thing that we get? It's like when he's a ticking time bomb, when
Hmm.
he is about to be angry and everything's about to get blown up. That tension is so cool, right?
Yeah.
Then he can blow up, but it's the tension before and the meaning afterwards, right? And
Right.
so of course he can do these really big things. And so that's the way I wrote him. We gave him Lou Gehrig's disease at first because that meant that the clock was ticking. And
Yeah.
he had to work out what to do. And Bruce Banner had to work on it, and the Hulk had to work on it. And then aspects of Banner's personality, you began to realize, oh my God, he's got lots of Hulks in there. He's got lots of them. And each one has a function, but he's not sure, he's not sure which one's going to end up controlling the body. I
Yeah.
don't know, I thought it was fun. And I also thought it had some meaning.
100%. Those things, whether it's DID or the cancer for a watchdog, like
Yeah.
superpowers can't beat that. Like there's not enough gamma radiation or adamantium in the world to defeat those kind of things. It almost harkens back to Superman's father figure dying from a heart attack. Doesn't matter how many powers he has. There's some things in the world you can't prevent. And then we have to learn how to navigate those storms once they've happened. Bruce also sometimes comes to me like an addict, who sometimes gets too much into their own stuff and then does a bunch of stuff, wakes up and realizes the lives that they've ruined, and kind of walks on that fine line too. I love punch 'em up stuff. I love, team battles and events. But to me, the real beating heart of the medium is when you have something very human to say and something very human to say about the human experience. You don't necessarily need to give a roadmap of what you should do and shouldn't do in all cases because everybody's different. But just the idea that these are things that we go through and we have to learn how to go through them better, especially if we want to be together. If we, as a humanity, I think we're just stronger together. But there is a lot of incentive to kind of keep us apart. So, if we are in any way, shape, or form, if we become more civilized since we've gotten out of the cave, then you can tell how civilized a society is by how it treats the weakest members of its society and on the ones that fall through the cracks. And mental health is such a humongous thing now. But I think similar to Bob, a lot of people are trying to self-diagnose as opposed to going to the right channels and and being open and honest about it. But I think that your series covers that greatly, especially like I said. I took a lot of that Bob stuff as the self-talk that happens to you sometimes, right? When you're on a date and you're like, this is going terribly. She doesn't really care. You picked her worst flowers. This is a terrible restaurant. The self-doubt that can go on in a person's head. And um, are you drawing from personal experience in that sense? Maybe not the depths of the darkness that Bob goes in, but do you have those moments of either self-doubt or imposter syndrome, any of that kind of stuff, or are you pretty chill in the seat that you've created for yourself? Because it is a pretty impressive seat.
Yeah, I don't really have those issues now. I don't really have any of that self-doubt. I suppose the way to put it would be that I've always been a supremely confident person, and I think that confidence is equal to accomplishment. And so
Yeah, yeah,
if you confidence makes it work, right? And And so, no, I don't have those types of things that I've written for him. But then again, I did just take my animal, one of my cats, to be euthanized, and it was, the thing that it always is very sad, right? She was a
Hmm.
little old lady. We loved her very much, and then, they showed me, well, she's, her paws are not pushing back on the table for it, so she's shutting down, and so I had to, I'm the one who does it for the family, right? I
Yeah.
have a wife and two
Hmm.
children, and but dad takes the animals in when it's time. So it's a very lonely road to go, like it's you and your animal, and you know where you're going, and so all of us are affected by those types of things. And then if it's something that isn't really part of my life, it's probably just because I'm trying really hard to research it and understand it. And I know people that are struggling. You know, I know people struggling with things from ADHD to bipolar disorder to, and so we're looking at all of those and trying to tell those stories in the Sentry. And hopefully, if we can continue to do more Sentry, which we'll see, it's certainly being talked about right now. And if we can, I have many stories that I want to tell, and I think there are some of them that are very tragic and some parts that are funny, and that's the human experience as well.
Yeah. Before I hand it over to Frank, who you got to work alongside, Jake Shear and some of the people over there at when they were creating Thunderbolts. What was your reaction to people's the film depiction of Bob? Because it's almost twofold, right? Like you write him and you get that series of fans who read it, who ingest it, who see themselves in him. But now that there's a cinematic version, what did you think of the one for one, and what did you think of the kind of response it generated from the fan base?
Mm. Yeah, that's good. Two separate questions because they're both interesting questions. To me, um, the film did it exactly the way that I think you should try to do it, right? They didn't really try to make it their own stamp. I did talk with Jake at one point, and they'd actually wanted to do the origin that I originally did. That he was a
Okay.
guy that couldn't remember he'd always been a superhero, and everyone had forgotten him, and they wanted to do that. They thought that was great, but it kind of happened in one of the Spider-Man films, and they said, "Oh, a similar theme appeared in the Spider-Man movie. Let's maybe not go down that road." And so they took the second series that I did, and they used that as basically their source material. That's very gratifying, right?
Yeah.
Um, but where I think it's becoming incredibly important to me is that so many fans have now said, "Oh, wow, I just discovered this guy, and he's my guy," right?
Yeah.
My joke almost a little bit is like, I get all the people who are struggling with their mental health and they're all my fans. And so I have a lot of really interesting interactions online, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But I love this. I love the fans. I've always been a pretty close to any fans of the work. There's nothing quite so gratifying as when you're sitting at a table and someone comes as dressed as the Sentry,
Yeah.
and so I think that's happening quite a lot. I think people are very excited about the character, and I have been interacting online. I normally don't do it as much, but now I've actually got a little bit more active and interact with people because there are so many questions from fans and so many heartfelt kind of ideas that come from them and questions and so many compliments that say thank you for creating my character. The one that I identify with. So it's been quite a trip,
Yeah.
and hopefully, we're going to make it continue. We've got a new film coming out in a few months,
Yeah.
and the idea would be to get things moving again.
Awesome. Awesome stuff. Frank?
So kind of staying on the Sentry thing. So after you consulted on Thunderbolts and worked with them on the Sentry, what spurred the new miniseries? Did Marvel say, "Hey, Paul, while you're here, do you want to work on him again?" Or did you say, "Ooh, I got the bug. I want to work on him again"?
Yeah. Ooh, I'll be honest, Frank. That's a hard one to answer because I just remember that there were a couple of conversations. It had been quite a long time since I had worked on Marvel books, and I had been doing some other things, in different media.
Yeah.
And I guess I was in a conversation with I can't remember who the conversation was with at Marvel, but basically the idea came up. Hey, look, the film's coming out. It's been a long time since you worked here. Why don't we have a go? Like let's do it. And I was like, yeah, I think that's fine. That sounds like fun, and it sounds like something that I should have been doing all along, frankly. But it was great, and so I went back, and they very quickly said, "I'll tell you what, we don't need you to tie into what the current status quo is of Sentry. Don't need that. Write you," because I think they had seen that they have always struggled with that character. It almost feels like people don't really understand how to write him, and
Hmm.
yet I find it really easy to understand, and it brings me actually to something I learned when I was writing the Inhumans. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, when we did that book, which was very successful at the time and really helped kind of springboard, Marvel's return in some ways from Marvel Knights. I learned something about the character of Black Bolt, and I hadn't realized it until way after the fact, right?
Hmm.
The point is that the character can't speak. If he speaks, everything goes badly. Stuff blows up, right? So I wrote a lot about him not speaking. And there was a moment in the series, which is 12 issues long, and I think we were around about issue 9 or 10, where fans were writing in on sort of the message boards of the time, Usenet,
Right.
whatever. And they were saying, well, when's he going to do something? He needs to do something. They're about to lose. And I'm like, yeah, well, now you care. And I never had him speak. And it turns out I was pretty much the only person that never had him speak. Everyone else has him say something and stuff blows up, at which point you've literally gone counter to the point of the character. He
Yeah.
can't use his powers that way. That is the conceit. And so if you break it, you're just breaking the idea. By the time they ended up doing the TV show, he did sign language. Well, that's him communicating. That's like literally the opposite of what the character's supposed to be, I think. And it certainly it takes away all the tension. And I can't work out why any writer doesn't realize that's the way that character's supposed to work. Move that over to Sentry. It's been surprising, like we are all vulnerable. And so the point was hopefully I made it well, which is it's not about how powerful he is, it's about how vulnerable he is. Let's do that. But I think people were writing him with this power surge and all this stuff, and I think that became that became the problem of the stories, where the conceit of the stories should have been this guy is struggling to work out how to make it in the world, and he has a lot of responsibilities and problems and stuff that he has to deal with, and he's just trying to get by, and he can't forgive himself, and he has trauma, and it's about not about like whether or not he's this bad guy that needs to be put down, but well, what most people with mental illness, or many people with mental illness, are trying to get better. Where's that bit? And then it didn't exist in those comics, and so hopefully in the last series, that's what we began to do.
Yeah. I speaking of your Inhuman series, I had read it when it came out and I was a fan. Reading it now, just after the show, it's just a reminder, like you said, sometimes people can take in a medium and just not really understand it. The stuff you were talking about with Black Bolt really rings true, even if you just take away the destructive nature of his voice, how dangerous a leader's voice is, how dangerous anybody in that position, a king, right? If a king
Yep,
says these people are bad and these people are good, right? This side versus this side, haves
yep,
versus have-nots, which I feel like is also a central theme in some of your stories, like Origin, right? Top, bottom of the hill, top of the hill kind of stuff. I'm reading in the class systems in this, and then of course they would listen to Maximus, anyone that's gonna rise them above their caste, even
yep.
though he's an insane man, and the parallels that we're dealing with now, with people maybe teaming up with people they shouldn't in an effort to find some sort of liberation and stuff. This after now since the show's already been a thing, but this read as it should have been almost a Game of Thrones kind of
Yep.
of story. It should have been a Game of Thrones kind of show, is what I'm trying to say. But I was just blown away because I've also heard that you didn't do much research into the Inhumans to do this story, and that's not a dig, right? You took what was useful to you, what you can see to make this story, and it stands the test of time because it's an excellent story. And also, as you were talking about with Bob, as some of the things that I kind of feel like people miss the mark with in regards to Superman, sometimes restraint is the power. Sometimes the ability to just hold it in and not do anything, it takes an enormous amount of strength. What do you think it is about most people, whether it be people who try to adapt it, people who try to write it, people who try to make it a movie? What do you think it is about the Inhumans that people seem to just not get?
Yeah, or Sentry, right?
Or
Sometimes, right?
Sentry?
Like,
Yeah,
what is it
100%.
about these characters? So, I will say that as a creative person, I wasn't a guy that had access to comics, for example, when I was a kid. I had some, mostly British 2000 AD, I think, that we would get.
Yeah, yeah,
I I don't understand why creative people, why writers aren't starting in the only place you can start as a creative, right?
hmm
To me, there's only one place you can begin. If you can't tell me why your story deserves to live, if you can't give me the why of the story, then don't start yet. Don't write it yet because you don't know why you're writing. You don't know what it's saying.
yeah,
You're absolutely right. His power, his struggle, his strength all comes about from the fact that he doesn't speak. And so it is his duty and his responsibility and the millstone around his neck that he can't speak. And that's very typically what a good leader is like. They can't say what is on their mind. They have to represent all of the people, no matter what they personally feel, etc., etc. And so that was in there. I feel like in the Sentry's case, he's not about the power; he's about the vulnerability, like I've said. And so I don't understand why people would embark on using these characters in Humans or Sentry or any of these characters if they didn't know why they were doing it in the first place. And yeah, you see quite a lot of these projects and you see the books quite often and you think, wow, I'm really unsatisfied by that because they didn't mind. They just wanted to do like 1,000 robot drones that attack this character and the character fought back and beat them all. And you're like, yeah, but that's not a story. That's an event, you know?
yeah, yeah. No, I think that definitely rings true. And again, having the show and the book fresh in my mind, the cutting of Medusa's hair is two completely different things.
Yeah,
In the show, it does in both instances they do defile her in that way, but one is a strategic like sacrifice, and
mhm.
another is just to show evil,
Yeah,
and
right.
and it like just seeing how something could be interpreted that way. I know that you've worked closely with Alan Moore, and I know how he feels about adaptations. Are you similar in that vein, where once you've written it, wherever it goes next, it goes? Do you have a bit of a territorial heart around some of the stuff that you've created and want to, like care a little bit more about how it is digested later on?
Yeah, mostly I'm not territorial, right? Mostly I'm happy, once I finish with it, I think it's someone else's idea, right? The only place where I get a bit territorial is if someone takes that idea and they're just working against the point of the idea, like why aren't you finding a why for the Sentry? Why aren't you finding a why for Black Bolt and the Inhumans? There's all these things that can be done. I would tell you maybe this is just on a personal level. A lot of the sort of comments I've gotten where people have interacted with me, they have basically said to me uh, that they couldn't understand why I could write the way I did and then go away for 15 years and they just like hated what was happening or whatever to some extent. I mean, I think there was some good work in there. And then I come back and they're confused. Like, how are you able to do it when other people can't do it? And I'm not so sure I have an answer to that. Also, it's very subjective. But I
Right?
will say that there are times when I look at it and go, why couldn't anybody see that writing about his power was pointless? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a side effect. Fans ask me all the time, well, is he, as we said earlier, is he this powerful? Is he that powerful? To which my answer is, you guys argue amongst yourself, have fun with it, right? But I don't know.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have to care about it either.
No, that makes a lot of sense. We were talking about it earlier. Right now, it's a billion-dollar film. Spider-Man: Brand New Day is out now. Spidey's making money. He just seems to be a tried and true character. But I know Frank was really digging your Spectacular Spider-Man run, so I'll let him jump in on this.
Yeah, I went back and refreshed myself on like your run on Peter Parker Spider-Man,
Mm.
and when you started on that, I will call that a rough period for the character. um
To be
and
fair, I
like,
think he's been a part of a lot of rough periods. Like I look at some of the,
Yeah.
I look at some of the stuff you may have resuscitated more than you created. I think they're right there in the middle there with bringing things to life and bringing things back from the dead. It's been very
that's
interesting.
that's fair. Um But, speaking of bringing things back from the dead, in your Peter Parker run, you did some really interesting stuff with Norman Osborn, which for me was the first time that I looked at it and went, okay, now I get why they brought him back, other than they needed somebody to finally end the Clone Saga.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was interesting doing Norman, and there were elements of his relationship with Peter in a sense. Norman has this son that he's disappointed with, and he realizes, the only one that's actually worthy of being his son and his heir is the one that he fights against, right? We had done that story early, and apparently, like Sam Raimi was kicking around the offices, and trying to work out how to finish out the film that they were doing, and saw that story and went, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? So back then they had me interviewed for the DVD, the Blu-ray or whatever, and they had, it was a cool kind of moment. But we went further with him, and I did write something that I think really did mean a lot. And actually, if you look at and this is not political, this is just like literally something that you can sort of compare it to. The struggle that people have with their parents leads to narcissism at times, right? If you don't have a good
Mhm.
relationship with your father, and so you can sort of see where Donald Trump didn't really have a great relationship with his father, and was always trying to kind of like work out how am I going, because the guy famously wouldn't help him, and so it kind of bred the same ideas into Donald Trump, right? That's almost like what was being written here, right? That this really rich and wealthy and powerful guy was basically left in a house overnight, and the origin of the Green Goblin came from those experiences. He was in a rainstorm, and the lightning would go and then the thunder would happen. So I grew up in the country, and we would have these incredible storms that would come right directly over where we were, and
Yeah.
you'd count, the lightning would go, then you would count seconds, and then you'd hear the thunder, and if it was like two, then it was 2 miles away, and they'd come towards you. But I slept for a while. We had a little house at the bottom of a hill, and I slept in the attic. That's where they put me,
Oh wow.
which is really tough. And I was terrified at night, and um, I became more scared of the light than I did of the dark, because I figured the moment that there's going to be a flash of lightning, and there's going to be something standing next to me. So we put that in the story, right? That he was
Yeah.
afraid of the light, and it turned him towards darkness, because the light was he could hear the goblin all around him in this abandoned house. He could hear it laughing and chittering and all that, and he didn't. He stopped being afraid of the dark. He got afraid of when the light would go and it would be standing next to him. And these are things that are like very psychological, but I think that they have a little bit more meaning, because you're like, oh, I get that guy. Like, I can understand that guy. You're supposed to, with villains, you're supposed to kind of understand them a little bit. You don't agree with their methods, but you certainly understand why they've gone that way. You know?
Yeah.
One thing I love that you did in your, I think it was your second Green Goblin story. So I read them all in like an afternoon. And that you did at the end of the Sentry miniseries too is you take these very heavy stories, all the mental health struggles of Bob, the narcissism, the struggle of Norman Osborn, his disappointment in Harry, his desire to make Peter his heir, and Peter's desire to beat the snot out of him. And then you end it with a just like off the wall funny moment. So like where Peter and Norman are just beating the hell out of each other, and then they just stop and they sit down, and Norman just goes, I wasn't going to call myself the Green Goblin. I was going to call myself Mr. Coffee.
That's right. That is right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I felt like you got to remember that every person, every one of these is a human being. I think if you get someone like Dr. Octopus, right, that guy is more like Ted Bundy. That guy doesn't care about anybody else's feelings. They only feel what they feel, but everything else is, so they're broken from birth in a sense, right? But many
Yeah.
people, so many people are not broken from birth. They're just untreated ADHD, or they're untreated depression, or maybe they just grew up in a really difficult environment that fed into their untreated ADHD. And so you're right. Like, what happens in that story is they beat each other almost to death, and they just sit down and they're just like, this is stupid. If we don't work this out somehow, we're never going. This is what we're going to be, you know. And so the Goblin says this thing about, like, I wasn't going to be the Green Goblin. I was going to call myself Mr. Coffee, and they're both beaten up. And then Peter starts realizing that's a really stupid thing, and they both start laughing. and they're sitting next to each other, sharing this experience. And what I believe that that scene does, it helps you to understand that they're the same two people, but they went like that and that, that one of them went in this direction, one of them went in this direction, and there's nothing they can do. And actually, the reason why I think that story probably is one of my favorite Spidey ones that we did is that Peter wins in a way that the Goblin doesn't see. He says to the Goblin, "I'm not going to kill you because Gwen Stacy would not want me to. And so you go ahead, kill my family. You're not going to make me hate you, which is what you're aiming for. Go ahead. If you want to kill my family or if you're trying to kill them, you have to kill them. But I'm not going to do what you want me to do." And that is the moment that he beats the Green Goblin. We had a scene in that story where you get to the very end and the Goblin is sitting at his desk thinking about what's just happened, Norman Osborn, and he opens his drawer and there's a gun in it. And then you pull out and you're outside the window and the birds fly as it goes bang. And you realize he's taken his own life. But they didn't let us do that.
But you still had the gun in the drawer. There was just
Had the
no
gun
bang.
in the drawer, yeah. Had the gun in the drawer, yeah.
It's interesting. I've had this conversation with even members of my own team. There's somebody that I speak to where he says that he's tired of the over-explaining of villainy in media, and in media in general. And I just feel like I want to believe that every person in the world starts off at a pretty normal level. They are the sum of all their experiences. They are the sum of everyone who they've ever interacted with, the cards that they were dealt. But no card is a dead man's hand. No card is automatically going to disqualify you from the things that you want in life. And then as trauma happens, because that was the thing I had to learn, that trauma happens to the heroes and the villains equally, as it happens to all of us. As prepared as you can be, bad things are going to happen to you, and your sort of reaction to those things kind of tailors the kind of person that you're going to end up becoming. There are a subset of fans who like the mustache twirling, take over the world, sort of villains. But to me, it's way more interesting how normal people fall through the cracks, how they feel like they're either unsupported or unheard, whether righteous or not, and how they go about, hurting others. Because Joker and Batman's origin are both tragic, right? And it's like Joker goes through something terrible and then says, "I went through this terrible thing. It was unfair, so all of you deserve to go through something equally terrible or worse." And Batman goes, "I've been through this terrible thing, but it was so terrible, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." And I find that distinction way more interesting in the good or bad, because the older you get, you realize how gray any of that stuff really is.
Yeah.
It's simplistic as a child for a reason. You have to know, do not steal. You have to know, like, do not lie. And then it becomes, do you steal bread to save your, feed your family kind of stuff. And it kind of gets more complex. So for a medium that can sometimes be shortchanged, and people can call them like punch 'em ups and stuff like that, I tend to veer towards the stories that you write, stories that have that substance, that question human existence, and don't judge necessarily the villains, but kind of give you that opportunity to say, well, wow, where did they stray? Where did they go wrong?
Yeah.
Is that something that you personally like from the media that you've taken?
Yeah, I think so. There's a little talk right now. I've got a couple of potential projects that we're discussing about working on villains. Yeah,
Okay.
I think villains are really interesting people to write. Sort of a rule of thumb, but not, there's no one rule to do it, is you kind of actually agree with them, but you don't
Hmm.
agree with their methods.
Right.
And I think that is a way that I've approached it. I recently reread something that I wrote many years ago, which was the origin of Cobra Commander. And as usual, I didn't know anything about G.I. Joe whatsoever. And then they went, "You did the origin of Wolverine. Would you be cool about doing the origin of Cobra Commander?" And I did, and apparently that story is still canon. That's the story of his origin.
Yeah,
But
man.
but we the story I wrote was about how he had been a car salesman, and he was making his way in the world. He was married, but his wife decided she was going to leave him. She took everything from him. He went to try and see if he could get any help from like the taxation of his business and all that, and it put him out of business. And now he's sitting there going, "Wow, there's taxation here without representation." The founding of the United States of America was about taxation, and so he's like this is wrong, right? We're being taxed, we're being taken apart. People take everything that we have, right? And it belongs to what is like government. That's literally the opposite of what this country was founded on. So I kind of agree with him, right? I'm like, actually, mate, you're right, right? Like the people, people's taxes are going towards crazy stuff or whatever. This is not what the country expected to be when it was founded. I
Hmm.
agree with that guy, but the bit where he and I differ is that he said, like, okay, I'm going to go murder 1 million people, and I'm like, no, no, don't do that.
Yeah,
Just
right.
go to therapy, mate.
Right.
So I mean, I think that we agree with these villains. We should understand them. And like I said, there's a few cases where not. I think that Doctor Octopus as a character, for example, is just a completely broken individual that never was going to be anything other than Doctor Octopus because he's
Yeah.
broken. But even then,
Hmm.
it's still a mental health issue.
Right, right. And there's still, and I think there's a difference between understanding something and sympathizing with it, right? Like
Mm.
sympathizing for
Right,
it. So you can
right.
understand someone's pathology without necessarily giving them a pass for anything that they've gone through. Speaking of villains, I found your interpretation of Venom very interesting in your Spectacular Spider-Man run because I like to joke around a lot with some of these characters, and I've always kind of felt like the symbiote and Eddie are like two scorned exes of Peter Parker, or Peter Parker
Yeah,
and Spider-Man. Their relationship's never going to really work because they're both together to spite someone else. So to hear that sort of jealousy go on, where the Brock is like he only wants you, like the symbiote only
yeah,
really digs you. That
yeah,
rang so true to me because I feel like all of it, the spider on the chest, all of it's like a, hey, look, I got a new boyfriend. I don't need you anymore. I know
yeah.
we were cool, whatever. Was that something that you always had in your head, or was that just a fun little addition when you start writing that story there?
Once as with anything, I don't know how other people's process goes. I don't know how other people approach it. But what I do know is you you have to kind of have something that you believe these people are, or some method by which they work, or some goal that they have, or something. You got to pick your thing and say that's what I'm writing about with this person, right?
Hmm.
I thought we had this like interesting little conceit in that Venom story that I liked personally because I found out that uh, certain types of cancer can release a big uh, push of adrenaline into the
Yes.
body. And what we found out about the symbiote was that it fed on adrenaline.
Hmm.
And so it kept bringing him up to the top of a building or something like that. It would literally wrap around him, make him go up to the top, and throw him off the building. And he's falling and he's about to die. And then it stops him at the last moment. And he's terrified, and the adrenaline's just spiking. But the symbiote is like, yeah, I don't like the taste of this adrenaline anymore. I want that spider guy because that tastes much better and it's better for me. So that the symbiote was just making a clinical decision because it doesn't have that same type of sentience. I need the Spider-Man guy because that's the best adrenaline I've ever tasted, and I want
Yeah.
that, right? And poor Eddie Brock was stuck in the middle of it, trying to work out who to blame. I want to tell you a really quick anecdote, by the way. I
Sure.
love this. I'm not a religious person, right? I don't, but I'm also not an anti-religious person. Like I see a lot of people that say, "Well, I'm not religious, but I hate it," and I'm like, hey, listen, people have strong beliefs. I mean, I'm not so sure it's easy to disagree with most of the things that Jesus Christ said. Question whether or not he's the son of God or some dude, right? But a
Right.
lot of his teaching is really good, and so I wanted to write there's a scene in it where he goes in to see a Catholic priest because he's Catholic, Eddie Brock. And what I wanted to write, which didn't really end up happening, was that he says, "Father, I think I'm." He's in confessional, right? I think I'm. What happens when you carry evil? When you can't get rid of it? And I asked a Catholic priest about that, and he gave me the loveliest answer. He said, "In the Catholic Church, we don't believe that anything is innately evil." So the priest would say to him, "You can't be evil. God doesn't create evil things." I thought, oh, that's really lovely, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there are many things that you can learn as a writer when you're trying to create these things, and that was something that I had learned. I really thought the idea of Eddie Brock, the original scene, but we just didn't end up doing it, was that he said, "Well, if there's no such thing as evil, open the thing," and the priest opens it, and the venom just attacks him,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
which
yeah.
would have been a little bit much, Poor guy's just going about his day,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's plenty of ways that you kind of try to study it. I like to ask the questions that I don't know the answers to.
I specifically saved that panel of I think he put the devil in me. Like that's such a line, and also the line where he says like something along the lines of like, doesn't it suck when you don't have the energy to hate them anymore?
Yeah,
Like dealing with a toxic relationship or dealing with any sort of, relationship that doesn't serve you, that you just kind of lull into comfort after a
yeah,
while, and you just kind of you were touching on all kinds of stuff while also Ramos's tremendous art is going on in the background and everything. So if it reads as kind of fun poppy, and then you make those turns into like very serious, very cool stuff. You've noted when writing for certain like existing characters that comics can kind of fall into two categories. It can be foundational or it can be additive.
yeah.
You can be digging the foundation from underneath where it stands, and or you could just add a bunch of adventures and stuff like that. With that perspective in mind, do you have favorite foundational stories in whether it be books, film, comics that were like, wow, they really nailed that character there, or they really, that really redefined this fictional person for me.
Yeah, if we're just talking about things that we're familiar with, for example, I mean, what I'll do is I'll relate it to maybe comics, right? Because there are plenty
Sure.
of foundational stories that exist. I'd rather think that Shakespeare's, Othello was the foundation of Othello, and anything else that follows was
Yes,
probably, you know,
that's true.
no,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Yeah. I mean, I think if you take a look at it in terms of the comic industry or comic films or books or whatever. I think there's a brilliant foundational story in Guardians of the Galaxy. You see that film and you kind of go, yeah, you know what? This guy's got nothing. He's so disconnected because he's so far away from where he grew up or what his home is. But he's got one thing. He's got this mixtape and he can
yeah,
listen to the
yeah,
music and he can kind of hear it and it brings him back. But he has no connection. And then he finds one. He has this like found family. That's a really nice way of making us go, I get it. He's a long way from home. I live a long way from where I grew up. I live in Atlanta in the States, but I grew up obviously in Great Britain. And so, I kind of identified with that. I think that there
yeah,
are plenty of those. I think that you could. It depends on what your definition of foundational is. Is Weapon X foundational? Feels like it, but I'm not quite
yeah,
sure. It seems like also a moment when I think we did the origin of Wolverine, there was a foundational element to it, and that's because when he pops his claws, he really loses his childhood, and it's the moment that he realizes the world is a violent place. That's a foundational thing.
yeah,
Um, and I want to be really careful here. I don't mean to be critical of, but in the second series, really what was happening is people were kind of going, well, look, this is how he met Sabretooth, to which most people in the world would go, yeah, but why do I care?
yeah.
That's an additive kind of thing. He met Sabretooth over here and they did this and this happened. Wow, now we know the origin of his relationship with Sabretooth, to which most people in the world go, I don't get
Right. I like the ambiguity of dog being in
it.
there, or the idea that there will always be a dog in his life. Like there will always be a version of that character through the many different levels of his life. But going back to the plain reading of things, the movie just made it Sabretooth as well. The movie just made
Yeah,
they just shorthanded it and said, you know what, let's get rid of all the mythos and the smoke and
yeah,
mirrors. We're just gonna connect the dots. And I was talking to Alex Packnadell about his Cyclops series in a similar way because he was writing one of the few, miniseries regarding Cyclops. And we had this very interesting discussion about like the fans' expectations of it being a cameo fest, right? Like we got to put Gene in there. How's Logan gonna fit? And how do we do? And there was none of that. There was nothing that me as a fan expected in that series, and I loved the series because I
right.
think sometimes the fans don't even know what they want.
Yeah,
It, it
that's a very true thing. I think I'm sure anyone else that does my type of job, working in comics, working in film, no matter what, there are a lot of big opinions, right? Well, I think this is my opinion. This is what you should have done. This recently, because of the Sentry series, I'm not sure about the specifics of The sales, I don't really know, but I know that it got really, really, really positive reviews across the board. Everybody kind of loved it and was made really sad by the book. And so I don't really chase reviews. I don't want to follow them. I just tend to be, I've got my own way of doing things. I don't really go looking at reviews, but I was excited
Yeah.
to see some reviews for Sentry. And so on the site that I found, there was also Captain Marvel. And
Hmm.
what I found was really interesting was how many people would say, yeah, well, I don't like this story because there's still, Paul Jenkins is using her as a half Cree person. I didn't like that story. And I'm like, that wasn't my story. That was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
written like 6 years ago. So
Right.
because the editorial has said this is her background and this is what she's doing, and I'm like, okay, you don't like the book because of a preconceived notion, and this happens all the time.
Yes.
Fans say they like something or they don't like it because a preconceived notion is what it is.
Hmm.
I do think it's better to just judge a story about whether or not you enjoy it because of the way it's written and drawn, as opposed to it hit the sort of points that you wanted it to hit. It's never going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, fans of like the Sentry didn't know what the Sentry was before they got into it. Therefore, they
Yeah,
came into it with more open minds and they were more accepting. Immediately when the second series comes out, they now have their own preconceived notions of what the character should do, could do, and all of a sudden the stakes are higher. But when you do that, the most recent series, it felt so honest. It didn't feel like, ugh, we're back to the drawing board. What do fans want?
yeah,
It literally felt like if this character existed from the last point that I left him, what would be his next struggle, his next journey?
yeah, yeah,
Instead of like, oh, we got 15 years to kind of like fill in the blanks and stuff like that. I heard you in another interview, and not to, disparage anyone, but someone was like, well, you've said that he has been gone for some time. Are you going to explain it? And you were like, no. And in my mind, that made me laugh. Not because that stuff is trivial, but it might be to him. Like
yeah,
in his story,
yeah,
like it doesn't really matter where he was, but there are very big, important ideas that do matter, and those will be fleshed out and those will be dealt with as they have been in your hands regarding this character for a long time. So yeah, even as a fan and somebody who writes reviews, sometimes I have to remember that, this is not my story. I am on the ride,
yeah.
and for as long as the series goes on, I can't really talk about what the ride was until we get to the end. I can't really, make up my mind about this whole journey until I get to the end there.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one developing with Captain Marvel right now because four of the five issues have come out, right?
Yeah.
But when you're doing a four-issue series or a five-issue series, that's a complete thing. So when you get to issue four and you're like, "Well, I don't know about this," or "Oh, I really like this," or "This is my decision I've made," I'm like, I think you can only really make the decision once you see the end of it. What am I driving at? Why in Captain Marvel? Why does she keep going back to this moment in time where her father was mean to her, but there's some kind of birthday card involved, but she can't work it out? Tune into issue five and read the whole thing, and you'll find out. And then we'll find out what that story really is.
Yeah. I know, and you've also expressed in interviews, we just spoke about it a little bit here about your aversion to political talk, because I don't
Mm,
think in the grand scheme of things, it sometimes, oh, most times it's not useful.
mm,
Um, but what I will say you've kind of tackled is sort of the class division. And I feel like
yeah.
that's something you've experienced personally in
Mm,
your own life. We see it in Origins about how they treat the help versus how they treat the people, the royals on the top of the hill. Same thing with Inhumans using slave labor and kind of stuff like that. And it's not getting better. So I feel like your work almost is aging like wine because
mm.
it kind of has tackled those things. Is that something that ever leaves you? Is those experiences of the haves versus the have-nots, the difference that you've experienced in your life? Do you think that's something that changes over time, or is that become a core part of you?
Wow, what a good question. That I think. Okay, so for context, I was raised in the country. My dad was gone by the time I was five, and then we were raised by a single mum, card carrying sort of women's liber, burn your bra kind of lady. My
Okay.
mum's absolutely mental. And so writing about mental health and stuff obviously comes from those kind of experiences that I've been through with my family. And we did live in this class division. The first real memories I have of childhood, or the first substantial ones, are going to school with a bunch of wealthy farmers' kids and wealthier kids whose parents are all, but my brother and I would walk to school.
Yeah.
We were the kids who were basically the kind of outcast gypsy kind of kids, right? And everyone that we went to school with didn't really like those kids, didn't like the gypsies, but didn't think that we were because,
Um,
and so we were hiding. And so my whole life, I've lived in two worlds. Think of when I won a scholarship to a school and I kind of moved out when I was 11 and went to the school and it was a boarding school. And so I hadn't really lived at home since I was 11. And when I went there, it was a very, very wealthy school, but it had four scholarships for full fee payers, to pay the scholarship. And I got in. I got into this school
whoa.
that was founded in 1553 by Edward VI. You're talking
My
about the
God.
kind of school that Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage go to. I went to that kind of
Yeah.
school,
Whoa.
but I came from, I was from a really poor family, right? So I've lived in two worlds always. I've seen two worlds always. People expect, that I'm I've been successful in the States and therefore, I must be from a middle class family. It's like, listen, I was just back in Britain a couple of months ago and I slept in a scrap heap and on my brother's land, no electricity, with rats running around my feet, and I didn't really care. I don't care about that. It would scare the crap out of my wife, but I
Right,
didn't
right.
care, right?
Yeah.
And and so I think that the divide that you're talking about, yeah, I see it. I don't do politics, right? It's specifically I avoid politics for that reason because I did grow up in the punk era. I grew up as a feral kid. I had red, white, and blue hair when I was like 11. I was like going to.
Yeah.
I was in London going to shows at night when I was 11, and my mum had no fucking idea whatsoever
Right.
but she didn't care anyway, right? My brother was doing the same thing, so I had this incredible experience, right? I got to see punk bands, some of their first shows. You'd see the Ruts in some pub, or the craziest one was showing up at there was a tent that was put up on Tooting Bec Common in London. I was, I think,
Uh-huh.
13, and I was just walking around by myself, and I asked the roadies, the carnies, basically, can I come and have a look? And they're like, yeah, there's a band playing tonight, hang out with us, and it was the Police. It was this
Oh my
pop-up concert
Oh,
they
gosh.
did,
wow.
and I was backstage. I was 13 years old, hanging out with the roadies, right?
That's amazing.
You make that life happen, and so I think that I gave a speech at Kennesaw State recently, or a few years ago, and it was this. It's what you cannot do. I'm going to tell you what you can't do. And I'm looking at all these students and their parents. Don't realistically expect you just show up and like ask someone if you can write a famous comic book and have them go, yeah, absolutely, why not? Don't think that you can change the way that stories are told in video games because you're working in them and you want to change it. Don't think you can do this. And I told them all the things they couldn't do, and the room was so flat and everybody was so angry, right?
Right.
And my poor wife is sitting there just like, man,
Kind of
everybody hates them.
looking.
And I said, yeah, that sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Except I've done every single one of those things. And it means that, and the place went nuts, right? And
Right.
afterwards, people coming up to me and asking for photos and saying that was the most inspiring speech. And I'm like, yeah, in some ways, this deprivation and this class division is fuel to be able to write about the human condition. So I was very lucky when I grew up, wasn't I?
Yeah. It just rings so true. It just rings like you were talking about before. Some people will try to write in genres or in themes that they're not familiar with. And sometimes doing enough research will get you across the line. But when
Yeah.
someone's really been in the thick of it, I can kind of relate. I was having a conversation with my friend about like sometimes I'm more comfortable in the more derelict parts of where I grew up. I don't know if I should be. I don't, it's because that's where I was born. That's where a lot of my DNA was made. And I know certain people who've never left there and that is home. That
Yeah.
mindset being there is that. And I haven't really parsed whether or not I'm supposed to like eventually switch over or become a completely different person. It just feels like I have a backpack full of everything I've ever done. And I'm
Yeah.
just kind of I'm just kind of walking with it.
Yeah. Totally understood.
Yeah. But speaking of punk rock, speaking of bands, I feel like um, being a musician and being in the collaborative nature of that kind of speaks to being in comics because no one does a comic alone, you know. So, would you like to take this time to shout out some of your best bandmates in the comic space? People like Jay Lee and stuff like that. Who are some people that you really like to jam with in the creative space like that?
So if we're talking about artists,
Sure.
um, I would say Ramon Bucks. People
Yeah.
don't realize how unbelievably talented Ramon is. Ramon Bucks, to me, would be like one of the first hires I would make as an editor, and I'll tell you why. Um, he's incredibly talented. He has about 8 different styles he can do. He probably won't like me saying this, but he can finish 2 pages before lunch, and they're
Whoa.
amazing. And when I
Yeah.
write for Ramon, when it comes back, it looks exactly what I pictured in my mind's eye. It's the only artist pretty much that I get it back and I'm like, man, the staging, the camera angles, the stuff, this is what I wrote, you know.
Yeah.
Obviously I've been lucky enough to work with Sean Phillips, who was the person that taught me where not to write, where to leave the space for the
Right.
art. Um, you know, I definitely would say those two people in terms of like a creative connection, and then obviously Mark Buckingham, because Mark and I understand each other creatively, and so we can. It's a pure co-creation. I will give some props to Christian Rosado, who did the recent Sentry thing. You know, Christian and I enjoyed working together, and he did amazingly, did beautiful work. So, I could say almost all of them.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
there's a few where you go like, oof, this is a really hard relationship. I don't know that they understand me, and but mostly, and then I will say this. Editorially, for example, there are some editors that just know exactly what to do, where to kind of pipe up, where to let it go, all that kind of stuff. So I'm very appreciative of editors because I've done that job and it's very hard.
That's another thing I was gonna ask. Like, are your relationship with most editors okay, given the fact that you've done the job, but you were doing it for Majestic?
Yeah, I did it for Tundra. I did it for Majestic. I did it for Ninja Turtles for a while too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I hope so, right? They'll probably tell you different. I don't know. Probably tell you I'm a pain. I'm not. I'm 100% focused on the best finished product. So I work all the way through. I get the artwork back. I re-dialogue it. Just because I've already been paid for it doesn't mean to say it's ready yet until it's finished and it's printed and it comes out. I know. I hope I know when to push back to an editor's comment and when to just go, yeah, cool. I get it. That was really helpful. How to spot the ones. And so, I try to have a good relationship with editors because you got to respect the work they do. It's a lot of really hard work. Trying to live in this industry right now. It's very hard.
Yeah, it's like herding cats,
Yeah.
with everyone going in different directions, especially now that comic books have become so IP heavy, and now you have somebody, a representative of Nintendo, that's like, no, on every page, Mario has to have this many fingers or whatever's going on there. So
Yeah.
I know it can get kind of crazy, in that sense there. I'm super stoked to see the future. I know you're holding a lot of stuff, a lot of the cards close to your chest as things continue to get settled and ink dries on stuff. I heard somewhere that you are going to be a animated koala. Is that true?
No, no, animated wombat.
That's way better.
Yeah.
Animated wombat. Is that true?
The wombat. Yeah, no, it's a character called Worldwide Wombat, and he's
Okay.
uh he's a sports reporter, and he reports on the crappiest sports in the world. So it's like, cheese rolling and
Oh,
bog jumping and world belly flop mud pit championships and stuff like that. And he reports on that. So
poor
yeah,
guy.
I'm going to be a wombat.
That's terrific. Yeah, poor guy. Um, I was a tremendous fan growing up of the video game series Twisted Metal, and I know
Mm.
that you worked on some of the live action kind of stuff there. Am I wrong to believe this is a bit darker than what you usually tackle? I thought you did a tremendous job, but it felt kind of bleak. Is that up your alley as well? Is that a
Yeah,
tool? Yeah,
anything's fair game. I mean, I think that what we did with Twisted Metal, Twisted Metal Black specifically,
yes,
which was kind of a reboot where Dave Jaffe, who created the series, had done 1 and 2, I think, and then
yeah.
Sony had tried to do 3 and 4, and it wasn't really working out, and they bring him
No.
back, and Dave is a big fan of Spider-Man, and called me up and went, mate, how would you like to come in? But I had worked on some games, so I knew how to do it. And yeah, it was very bleak, but it was actually really interesting because it's such a nihilist game, right?
Yes.
Just go around blowing people up. What's to like, right?
Yeah.
It was pretty crazy. And so yeah, I enjoyed doing that. One of the things that I've done in games is I've been really interested in, especially back in the mid '90s all the way through mid 2000s. I was really interested in changing the way they tell stories and pretty instrumental in doing so. I think when people look at the darkness, they realize that the darkness, we probably did things that no one else was doing at the time, and intentionally we were telling a love story in a game, and people would not commit money to making environments where there wasn't gameplay, but 2K Games did. They believed in the project. And I think there's kind of a way of speaking about people can do this by themselves. Anyone watching this is welcome to go do it. You want to know a little bit more about Assassin's Creed, then go
Yeah.
and look at the front cover of Prototype, and I think you might see
Uh,
some similarities. And so some of the things that we did in Prototype, I created this thing called the web of intrigue, and
yes.
it pieced together little pieces of video that you would find. And it's interesting that concept was very prevalent in Assassin's Creed. Uh,
Yeah.
so I've hoped to be able to innovate in storytelling in games, and hopefully we've done some interesting things. Twisted Metal, on the other hand, wasn't supposed to be too innovative. It was supposed to be mental because Dave
Yeah.
understood that the way the game plays is people just need to, turn off and tune out and drop into the game and just blow stuff up. And that's what we did.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the narrative of that series is watching the monkey's paw sort of endings, right? Where the person thinks they have it exactly that's right. Was that fun writing how somebody's wish could eventually be turned on them by Calypso?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that was a fun time, because Dave trusted me, and Dave is really, really brilliant at what he does, and he knew exactly how to make his game work. So we could just work really easily to make that stuff all happen, and it was enjoyable, yeah. And it taught me a lot, so that I could go to the next game I did and be better at that.
Awesome, awesome. Before we wrap things up, Frank, what you got?
Um, so I play a lot of video games. I don't finish a lot of video games.
Yeah.
So it was really funny when I stopped and started looking at it, just how many games you worked on that are actually games I finished. Like The Darkness. I
Yeah,
played that start to finish. That was like it was unlike anything else I'd played, which you just said was basically the intent.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then Prototype, I'm like one of the 5 people that love Prototype.
Oh,
That's nice.
prototype was great.
Yeah, no, it did okay, Prototype. Yeah, especially Darkness, Frank. Like that to me, I look back on that and say, man, I've said it before, but I'll just give you one quick anecdote before you continue. I was able to go over to Sweden and work with a developer, but I was my own approval. The approval had to go through Top Cow, but I'd written Darkness for Top Cow and revived the character so much with Dale Keown. So when I went over to do the work, Top Cow, basically Matt Hawkins and Mark Silvestri were like, do whatever you like. You're your own approval. So I could go there and tell the developers, guys, you're on the wrong track right now. We're going to do an immersive love story. And to their credit, they were like, this is amazing. Let's do it. And so when we pitched it to originally Majesco said, we're not doing that. But they sold it to 2K Games. And as they
Uh,
sold it, I got a phone call from Anthony DeLuca, who's the producer, and he said, what are we doing? And I lied. And I said, we're doing an immersive love story. And he went, absolutely. So I'm glad you finished those games because they were worth it. The endings were worth it.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
With The Darkness, how did it feel to hear Mike Patton doing the job he did with the
That
dialogue?
was cool. Yeah. But I mean, I was over there when the voice recording was going, so I could be part of it. So yeah, it was very interesting. It's really mad. It was fun. It was fun.
All right, and I know you wrote the game, so you're not going to have an answer, but I have to ask since you're sitting here. Ultimate Destruction, that was so much fun.
yes, it
Is
was.
there any chance on Earth of getting like a remaster or something?
Yeah. That game is the one that I point to so often and say, as cerebral as I sometimes get, I don't know, or as, heartfelt with making people
Yeah,
cry
yeah.
with the Sentry. And I'm like, if you want to just have the most fun you can have with your clothes on, right? Or you take them all off if you want. I don't care.
If you want to.
Go play the Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction because it's we were doing things. There's no way that they would let us do the things that we did in that game now. There's no way. At one point, you flatten a school bus, and then you go surfing down the middle of the street on a school bus. Right? There
Yeah.
is zero chance in hell that they would let us make that game anymore. It's probably the reason why it hasn't been remastered and put out because we were very politically incorrect. My favorite thing about that game was that we had these purple gorillas that were always outside. They were blown up. They were full of like hydrogen or whatever, helium, and you could grab a purple gorilla and you could run all the way up to the top of a building and jump, and now suddenly you're holding onto a purple gorilla. And as the Hulk, you're just floating around the city. And we had mini games of just floating on a purple gorilla, right? So interestingly, there were some techniques that I created for that game that hadn't been in existence. And you may understand this. I'll try to see if I can get it right. I always want to push in an innovation way with storytelling. In other words, how
Hmm.
can we be immersive with the response on the game? And it's to my great credit that had a lead designer, Eric Holmes, who's this great doer Scotsman that always says, Jenkins, you're like a closet designer. Every time we do a game, you've got an idea that we actually program into the game. In this one, it was that I needed the player to get information about the story, and but I didn't want to have them do a cutscene. I hate these cutscenes. I know there are cutscenes in this work, but against my vigorous protest, I don't like
Right.
them. You should be moving things with your thumb, and the story should come at you, and you should learn it as you go. But one of the things that we managed to do was that every time you got a mission from the Hulk, you had a tunnel that you exited from at your HQ. And that tunnel, if you ran it as fast as you could, it took 10 seconds to do it. So I had 10 seconds at least of being able to do an interactive like radio transmission where we give you pieces of story. And no one had ever done anything like that. So I think, some of these innovations, I had a big innovation in the second Darkness game where I had been moaning for years about first person narratives. We're seeing through the eyes of the player. Why not take the controller and allow the controller to have some haptic rumble feedback when we speak? Because it's going to approximate your voice box. And they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it. And finally, they did it. And on the very first day that game was released, IGN did a big thing with the producer and someone else from 2K. And they started playing. They're like, oh, wow, the I get feedback when I'm talking. That's really helpful. Whose idea was that? And they just looked at each other and they were like, yeah, that was Jenkins. Because I had been fighting it for years and now they found out it
Yeah.
was right. So I'm really high on making games that really bring you into the form of storytelling that a game is. I want to move my character through this game. So if I'm going to take you out and do a cutscene, at the very least, it has to be a very rewarding cutscene that comes at the end of something that the player wants. But if you're trying to give information to the players through cutscenes, that's a bad game. It's a poorly made game, in my opinion. So,
Interesting. I think floating on a purple gorilla is going to be my new drug euphemism. I think I'm going
yeah,
to start using that
absolutely.
out in the wild. But it seems like, in regards to like cutscenes or splash pages, you care about storytelling and you
Yeah,
care about the mechanism of storytelling and you think that there's a more efficient way to do it. But that's not to say that you can't break form. That's not to say that you can't create new form.
yep.
If that's the best mechanism in which you tell stories. But is comics still your favorite way to tell stories?
Well, I will say this: that if I hadn't done comics for a little while, I was sort of out of it for a bit, and I found one thing: I miss my friends in the industry. I missed that. But the second thing was that it makes you creatively really sharp because you're taking tiny frozen moments in time and doing a story that's worth telling in 20 pages. That's hard, right? That's a
Yeah.
very difficult thing to do. So um, I think so, but I think I'm a better screenwriter, to be honest. Like, so the films that we're working on and stuff that I've got going on, and that stuff I know will have a lot of meaning.
Yeah.
So I kind of prefer writing screenplays. I've done one novel. I really struggled with it because I had an open-ended amount that I could do, and I found it would be very difficult.
Yeah.
I love game writing. I love film writing. So there's so much stuff that you can do.
No, 100%. And yet these are tools you pick up in those different areas, but they all work
Yeah.
universally sometimes in just sharpening your skills with all this stuff. We got issue 5 coming out soon of Dark Paths. We have Sentry finished up, but that was open ended. They're like, yeah, when the Void comes back, and I'm like, yeah, that bus can't be late, man.
That's right.
Whatever's happening, better, it better be happening soon. Um, I'm kind of just blown away by the amount of work that you've been able to do and the amount of quality work that you've been able to do. I know that this medium in terms of comics is very you're always in the second act. You got to like maintain the second act. Like it's your
Yeah.
job to dribble and never shoot, pass it to the next person and hope that they can keep dribbling. And that can be frustrating, but it's never felt like you phoned anything in. It's never felt like, oh, I gotta fill 3 issues with something. It's always felt like everything that you've come with your whole heart. And I think that's the reason why you have the fan base that you do and the success that you do, because of that level of transparency and earnestness in regards to the things that you tackle. And it's not to say that you don't have some bombastic fight scenes or some really cool, intrigue and stuff going on. And then the quips with Spider-Man, talking about Venom's butt and stuff. Like you got some of that stuff going on there too. But the true beating heart of comics continues to beat because of creatives like you that are able to elevate the medium when they see fit and realize sometimes I think, and for I think that again goes to like levels of capitalism. I think sometimes we underestimate the reader. We underestimate their ability to latch on to something, to connect the dots, to see their reflection in the art. And what I've been noticing as somebody who really likes to do the deep dives and have this major discourse and talking to these creators is that so much of it is intentional. Whether or not every reader is supposed to pick up on it, that's arbitrary. It lives there. And if you put all your passion and all your heart into a project, it will continue to live there with the same enthusiasm, with the same vigor, with the same electricity of when you first put it. And that speaks to everything. Like I said, all your stuff is going to age like wine because all of that love, that heart, and that effort and that purpose is all still in there. So I guess just on behalf of the fandom, thank you so much for what you've been able to provide in the various different parts of your career, in your continued effort to just elevate things, to question why things are done the way that they are. Why can't they be done better? Why can't we change and break the molds that worked? And yeah, they worked for a reason when they did, but it's been some time. Why can't we change it up? Why can't we look deeper at not only these characters, but the methods and tools that we use to tell their stories? And that innovation has just, like I said again, done nothing but make comics better. So knowing that that's where you started, knowing that that's where you live, and knowing that there is a future, that you're still like there's still pitches up in the air, that there's still films, that are starting up here. I'm super excited for the world that Paul Jenkins ends up creating, because every world that I've visited has been worthwhile. Every time that I've spent, every book that I've bought, every page that I've turned has definitely been worthwhile. And it just as somebody who reviews comics, and then you've probably been this way with music and all kinds of stuff, you can hear something on the radio and be like, I can see how serviceable this is. I can see why other people would dig this. And
Yeah.
then you can listen to your favorite artist and be like, damn, they still got it. Like, damn,
Yeah.
they're still knocking it out of the park. Like this is as good as I remember it, but wiser and sharper and more disciplined because of the runway that they've had up until this moment. So yeah, from us to you, just thank you.
Well, thank you, man. I would say, at the time that we're talking, we're a week away from the last issue of Captain Marvel, right?
Hmm.
And what I know about the last issue is that it will have the piece that is me. That when people finish that series and they look at the last few pages and they realize, oh my God, like all these things that have gone up and down throughout the series meant something that we didn't see coming. And that there's a final way in which Carol Danvers gets something that she probably needed. And some other characters do as well. There's this like kind of reckoning, and to me, I think if you can satisfied. I always harken back to dearly departed Peter David.
Yeah.
When he died, I was very sad. He's a very larger than life kind of character. Loved to talk to fans. Would talk for hours. Sometimes a curmudgeon, sometimes a loon.
Yeah.
But Peter did this thing. His feeling, I think, and I hope mine is the same. If you pay $5 for a book, I want to give you $10 worth of value, right?
Okay.
That's sort of like the general rule of thumb, and I'm not sure everyone does that, but I know Peter used to try and do that. I know that I try to aim to do that, so there's meaning and value in these stories. So let's see, like I hope that people like Captain Marvel. I hope they like the next one that I'm currently working on, which I'm really surprised Marvel didn't announce at San Diego.
Okay,
But
okay,
I've
okay.
got a big project going on. I've got another big project that's not actually with either of the big two, that is taking a very, very well-known character from literature and doing almost like a sequel kind of project,
Okay.
in
Othello,
comics.
Othello 2. You're doing Othello
Yeah, I'll
2.
tell it too. This time it's
Electric
personal.
Boogaloo. Yeah, this time it's personal.
Yeah, no. So I have this stuff lined up, and obviously I'm talking to Marvel about more new things. That they're in change right now, but it's not turmoil. Steve Wacker has come in,
Yep,
and
yep.
he's new editor in chief. So there are things that I'm talking with Steve about, and hopefully I'll be doing for a while over at Marvel.
That it's so interesting to see you grow with Marvel because Marvel's been through its ups and downs, riding highs, riding lows, and yet your quality of work has never changed because you're you and you are providing what you can to these stories, regardless of what's going on behind the scenes. So there's no doubt in my mind when the ship steadies, because again, no turmoil, just some waves as things get moved
Mm.
around, as people get moved around, as quite literally the headquarters gets
Yeah.
moved around.
Yep.
As a New Yorker, heart a little broken, but I understand, things change. Yeah, you are what stands the test of time. You are what continues, and that just speaks so much to your quality of work and what you've been able to add to the comic book space.
All right.
If you want some of these loons that are around to follow you, to read your Substack and stuff like that, where could they find you? Where would you like to be found if you want to be found at all?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, obviously, I really like it if people came by the Substack. I enjoy writing it, but you understand the reason why it took me about 6 weeks to write the last one because it's very sad.
Yes,
And
yes.
I, for whatever reason, I want to put out regular Substacks, but writing the story of how I lost my corgi, which is very tragic, was really difficult. And so sometimes there's that bit where you do have life intruding on your art. And I was like, man,
Yeah.
I don't want to write this. I don't want to feel it again. But I did it, so it's sort of like a gift to everybody. Like, oof, that was a hard one. Now I want to do a bit more comedy and all that. So if you find me on my Substack, I believe it's on Paul Jenkins Writer on
Yes.
Substack. You can find me on, I suppose, on X at my Paul Jenkins,
Okay.
because I
Okay.
still tweet there. Um,
You got to
and
tweet and leave.
I tweet and leave. Yeah,
tweet and leave, man. Because
I
don't get
don't.
any of it on you.
Yeah, I try not to actually look at anything else that anyone posted. And then I can be found. People sort of. I guess apparently the way I've set my Facebook page, which is funny, because I only ever interact with my friends. I see people, but it's
Yeah.
actually open, so people can find me on Facebook and just kind of like hang out with us and post on my page, which is
Ah,
fine.
okay.
That's absolutely fine. So come find me there. I'm not massive on social media, but I'm getting better. So.
Yeah. Again, regardless of your space of social media, you're massive in the heart of the fans. You're massive in the terms of comic book history. I thank you so much for giving me not only your time, but your, again, transparency and your earnestness in regards to your work. It's just a reminder that if you were put on this earth to create, you have to do it fearlessly. You have to do it with your heart on your sleeve. We only really ever get one life, and everyone's going through it the same for the first time. Every single person. So
Mhm.
make your effort worth it. Deserve the day, deserve the time that you spend with the people around you. Mental health is important. Friends are important. Staying true to yourself is important. And yeah, on occasion, comic books are important too.
All
So
right.
again, thank you so much for your time. And we just like to end these by reminding everyone that you, yes, you are worthy. Thanks, guys.